Penguin Random House Audio presents Life in the Garden by Penelope Lively. Read for you by LLOYD.
Introduction. Virginia Woolf goes gardening one day in May, which sets me thinking about the curious apposition between gardening as reality and as metaphor. Beatrix Potter's swinging parable about the superiority of rural values, the tale of Johnny Townmouse, invites an inspection of the traditional divide between town and country. Willa Cather's prairie gardens, made by the American pioneers, remind me that gardening can be about control, the conquest of nature, but that it also defies time. My grandmother's garden, deeply influenced by Gertrude Jekyll in both landscaping and planting, prompts consideration of the vicissitudes of gardening fashion. The two central activities in my life, alongside writing, have been reading and gardening, and there has always been a sense in which the two have meshed. I always pay attention when a writer conjures up a garden, when gardening becomes an element of fiction. I find myself wondering what's going on here. Is this garden deliberate or merely fortuitous? And it is nearly always deliberate. A garden contrived to serve a narrative purpose, to create atmosphere, to furnish a character. So this is a book in which fictional gardens act as prompts for a consideration of what gardens and gardening have been for us over time. Why and how do people garden? Why and how have they gardened? I shall need to get personal. If you've been a gardener, all references to gardens, plants, gardening activities strike a chord. Am I interested in that? Have I tried this? So there has to be a strand of memoir wound in with everything else, a life in the garden. From the first suburban plot, in which my husband and I carefully rescued and planted out a whole lot of willow herb seedlings, because we didn't know what they were, to the few square yards of London that are essential today, and where I can still be rapturous about a new hellebore, or purring over a pot of snowdrops, positioned so that I can see it from the window. I grew up in a garden, almost literally, because this was a hot, sunny garden in Egypt, and much of life was lived out of doors. Our home was one of 3 houses built outside Cairo in the early 20th century, a sort of alien enclave amidst fields of sugarcane and clover, canals and mud hut villages. All 3 had large gardens, and my mother had created ours very much in the spirit of the English garden, with lawns, rose beds, lily ponds, pergola walks, and a necessary nod to the climate and what would grow there by way of poinsettias, lantana, zinnias, cineraria, and bougainvillea. Though she did once plant daffodil bulbs, which were rightly aghast at what was required of them, and set up just a few spindly blooms. But for me, the garden was a kind of intimate paradise, intensely personal, with private hiding places, a twiggy hammock in a hedge where I went to read Swallows and Amazons and tales from Troy and Greece, a particular eucalyptus tree with which I was in animistic communion, the bamboo-shaded water garden where tadpoles massed around the roots of the arum lilies. I can still draw a map of this garden in every detail. It no longer exists. The whole of that area has long since been subsumed into Cairo's urban sprawl. But when I went there 30 years ago, I felt that its memory must lurk beneath the slum houses and the rubble, a memory of trees and grass and flowers, and the ghost of my own alter ego. Gardening is genetic, as far as I'm concerned, and runs down the female line. In my family, it started with my grandmother, Beatrice Reckitt, who made a magnificent garden from the tabula rasa of a sloping Somerset field, complete with Gertrude Jekyll-style rill and sunken rose garden, lawns and ha-ha, kitchen garden, summer house and potting shed, all the attributes of the serious garden. Her daughter Vera, my mother, gardened an English garden in Egypt. I graduated from the suburban plot of 2 successive Oxfordshire gardens, one with 2 streams running through it. My daughter Josephine gardens in a more informed way than any of us, A working musician, an oboist, she took Royal Horticultural Society courses many years ago in spare time that she did not have, and now gardens in London and in Somerset with expertise that I admire and envy. And her daughter Rachel, another musician, seems next in line. A serious engagement with sweet peas last year looked significant. You don't discover your own gardening potential until you have gardenable space of your own, if only a humble window box. Jack and I were fired up by the suburban plot, though there might have been a streak of genetic compulsion for him as well. His father had gardened with a sort of fanaticism in the family's council house garden in Newcastle, a garden in which all expense was avoided, the patch of lawn made from clumps of grass dug up by the roadside, everything grown from seed collected always for next year, runner beans rubbing shoulders with hollyhocks, lettuces nudging alyssum and lobelia. The other end of the spectrum from my grandmother's Somerset acreage, but the drive and commitment the same. The urge to garden transcends social circumstance, which accounts for the allotment movement, of which more later, and the floral energy of small front gardens up and down the land. I remember a visiting American friend gazing in wonder at the flamboyance of June. Everyone in this country grows a rose. If 3 acres and a cow was the land reform slogan of the 19th century, today's requirement would be that minimal plot where a person can grow something, anything, can get their hands into the earth and defy time. We garden for tomorrow and thereafter. We garden in expectation, and that is why it is so invigorating. Gardening, you're no longer stuck in the here and now. You think backwards and forwards. You think of how this or that performed last year. You work out your hopes and plans for the next. And for me, there is this abiding astonishment at the fury for growth, at the tenacity of plant life, at the unstoppable dictation of the seasons. As I write, in late winter, the first snowdrops have nosed out of the earth. The ground-cover roses have tiny red knobs that say they are remembering what they have to do come June. A single white choisia flower is unseasonal but obedient. The days are a bit warmer, time to get going. Everything will happen anyway. That is what it is programmed to do. But the point of being a gardener is that you can manipulate this marvellous process, contrive, direct. But plenty will resist direction, of course. The weeds will fight back. Anthropomorphism is unavoidable, I am finding in writing about gardening. Weeds don't just grow, they grow with intent. They grow aggressively. Well, they do, as any gardener knows. They sneak in and swarm up when your back is turned. There is always this sense that the garden is a living entity with its own agenda, hundreds of conflicting agendas, and that you're in control only up to a point. A precarious relationship in which it is not clear who has the upper hand. Fanciful, I dare say, and perhaps this animistic view is just the lingering effect of my childhood immersion in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking-Glass. We can talk, says the tiger lily, when there's anyone worth talking to. The flowers make personal remarks about Alice, as adults tend to do of children. You're the right colour, and that goes a long way. You're beginning to fade, you know, and then one can't help one's petals getting a little untidy. The literary garden may have acted as prompt very early on for me, reading probably in that personal space within an Egyptian hedge, and reading with that unique, never-to-be-recovered immersion of childhood reading, when a fictional world invades the real one and you no longer know quite which is which. I know I talked to that eucalyptus tree when I was a child, and quite possibly to flowers too, wandering from the pages of Alice out into the garden. I don't now, but perhaps I should. Prince Charles does, it seems. In 1986 he was quoted in saying that he spoke to his trees and plants, that it was important to engage with them, and that they responded, though he does not seem to have specified in quite what way. He was ridiculed for this in some quarters, But somewhat later, in 2009, the Royal Horticultural Society, it was reported, decided to test his theory.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?